Well, everybody, we have another Mercury retrograde coming up, and I know you're all going, oh no, Mercury retrograde. Well, first, my little lecture, Mercury goes retrograde at least 3 times a year. This year it's three and a bit because Mercury stations retrograde one more time before the end of our calendar year. And this year, all the Mercury retrogrades have been and are in Earth signs for the first time since 2016. So that's called a Mercury elemental year. Gary Caton, astrologer Gary Caton, wrote a great book about that if you want to explore that more. But each year, or about the calendar year and a little bit over, the Mercury tends to retrograde in the same element. So this year has been all about Earth retrogrades. And so that's often to do with border disputes. So we can kind of see what's going on over in Russia and Ukraine, and also Taiwan and China. I know that's not gone to war yet, but they're kind of vying over it. And there may be other kind of border disputes as well. Also, there may be things that are about the earth and within the earth come up as well with an earth elemental year. And settlements and so on are often disputed. In 2016, there was a dispute over Israeli settlements, and I believe that's coming up again. And also Brexit. The Brexit movement developed during 2016. And of course, we also had a presidential election here in the US in 2016. So I'm not going to talk about that. But, globally, we may experience similar things, but each retrograde is different and has its own flavor, of course. But I just wanted to kind of set the scene about this being a Mercury retrograde in the sign of Virgo, an earth sign. But of course, Virgo is said to be one of of Mercury's home signs. And I don't know if you've already noticed, I'm recording this on August the 17th, and Mercury is going to go retrograde on the 23rd until September the 15th. And things have already got pretty wonky. Now, this is because it's been exacerbated by Mars also being in Virgo, but Mars will leave the sign of Virgo on on August the 27th. So 4 days after Mercury stations, Mars will leave the sign of Virgo and leave Mercury to it. But no, not quite alone. And we'll look at the chart in a minute. But first, let's talk about the sign of Virgo that Mercury is going to retrograde in. So Virgo is a mutable earth sign, which means it's a changeable sign. All the mutable signs often bring a lot of change. Now, the key concept for Virgo really is humility and the need to serve. In many ways, it's the sign of the priestess. And I thought this lovely image behind me was very suited, even though it looks very AI-ish. But this is from Deposit Photos. But it's a very modest sign. It's very much about analysis. It's very much about service, about how useful we are, and about what meaning we have. Virgo is also associated with organization and order, although every Virgo I know is not very tidy. So I don't think of Virgo as necessarily tidy in their home, but they've kind of got this organized chaos, if you like, with it being a mutable sign. Virgo likes to know where everything is, and they've kind of got their own organization kind of schedule. Virgo can also be a little bit nitpicky and a little bit perfectionist and pedantic and very precise. So you might, well, I'm already seeing it actually, a lot of grammar kind of corrections, shall we say, on social media, and a lot of people picking fault. And I think as we approach the retrograde, I think a lot of that has to do with Mars' presence there as well, because Mars can be a little bit assertive and aggressive. But what are we going? What's the retrograde going to really kind of show about, be about? Well, Mercury retrograde. Mercury is a planet of transference and transmission, if you like. So Mercury rules, the part of us that speaks, that transmits information, that absorbs it and then sends it out to the world. And when the Mercury apparently goes backwards from our perspective, because of course the planet doesn't actually move backwards, it's just from our earthly perspective, Mercury does a loop and appears to go back through the degrees from our earthly perspective. The flow of energy really starts reversing. So it's reflection, redoing, revisiting, reimagining, reorganizing, all those kind of rewords. And when a Mercury is retrograde, it's more an internal process, because when Mercury goes retrograde, it's actually coming closest to Earth. And I am going to give you some dates and things when we look at the chart as well. And, Mercury is also associated with, communications, digital communications, also short journeys and things mechanical. And Virgo is very much to do with things that are made with the hands and things that we make that are very very usefulness. So, things can go wrong and wonky. Over the last couple of days, we had a big power outage, and then the power surge came back on, I now know, and fried our internet. And I had a big class that I was running, and we've had to reschedule, and I've had to reschedule some client calls as well. And it just is what it is. You have to kind of roll with things like that. I honestly think there's no good purpose in fearing Mercury retrograde and not kind of listening, because a Mercury retrograde is about listening more to what you're being asked to do. I had kind of an enforced rest yesterday afternoon. There was only so much I could do on my phone, which is all I was able to use after everything went really haywire. So I had a rest, another reword. So it's time to rest, restore, rejuvenate, all those things. And really, it's such a short period of time. So August the 23rd to September the 15th, a little over 3 weeks. Sure, we have the shadow period as well, but the retrograde period is really that time to rest, restore, rethink things, revisit things. It can be a little bit frustrating for sure, because you may have a hard time expressing what you want to say, or the energy can seem a little bit stuck. But to my mind, especially in an earth sign, you are kind of meant to go and reconnect with the earth, with nature, and really kind of get grounded and let those words work their way within you, so that when Mercury stations direct again, you are ready to kind of put things out in the world. Anyway, that's my thoughts on Mercury retrograde. Before we look at the chart, I'd love for you to subscribe and give me a thumbs up. The more subscribers and the more thumbs up I have really help with the algorithms for YouTube. So I would really appreciate it. Also, if you leave me a comment or watch right till the end. YouTube loves all those things. But in case you don't know, I am Louise Eddington. I am the Cosmic Owl of Cosmic Owl Astrology, a professional astrologer. I've been studying astrology since 1990, what I would call real astrology. I've been practicing professionally since about 2011, 2012. And so let's dive into the actual chart now. Okay. So Mercury stations retrograde on August the 23rd at 3:59 p.m. Eastern time in the US. Okay, and I'm going to draw some lines. So Mercury is over here stationing retrograde at 21 degrees 51 minutes of Virgo. You can see that Mercury is very close to Mars, but Mars, as I say, will move on pretty quickly and actually leave the sign of Virgo on the 27th. And Mercury and Mars are going to start moving apart because they're moving in opposite directions. Now, Mercury is stationing retrograde conjunct one of my favorite asteroids, Pallas Athena. She is the creative intelligence asteroid. She's also the wise justice warrior. And in the sign of Virgo, this kind of sets the scene, in my opinion, for the tone of the retrograde. The two will actually meet together on August the 26th as Pallas is moving forward and Mercury backwards, but they are really together on the station retrograde. And Pallas Athena is a problem solver. She can pull all the pieces of the puzzles together and come up with a strategy. And so I kind of like that these two very mindful, mental kind of energies are together for the start of this Mercury retrograde. It suggests to me that this Mercury retrograde, with Virgo being so much about detail and usefulness and meaning, that we are going to be reflecting on strategies, on how structures and setups and the details and the filing cabinets of things are really set up. And I am already feeling that in my business, to be honest. So, you know, that kind of gives a little flavor of where things are going. Now, the main or the closest aspects initially to this retrograde, are the major ones, are that there's a trine to Uranus. Now, Uranus has been in Taurus for quite some time, and Mercury and Uranus are both kind of idea kind of things. Uranus is more the light bulb moments, the more innovative kind of moments, but it's also an energy of change. Mercury is a shapeshifter, a trickster, and very kind of non-binary, kind of moves between the worlds. Mercury was the messenger of the gods, and Uranus is really kind of Prometheus, bringing fire down from the gods and bringing those big insights and sudden kind of slaps around the face, like, what you mean you hadn't thought of that before? But this aspect is not exact yet. However, I do think it's going to have a big impact on the retrograde, because Uranus is stationing retrograde just 5 days after Mercury. So in effect, the two are both stationed, because Uranus has an 84-year cycle, and so they are both stationed, which is a very powerful moment in any chart and any planetary movement. So here we have these two transformation agents, if you like, really kind of digging in and saying, okay, big changes are coming. But we're going to finish that story later when Mercury moves direct and actually does finish and complete that trine with Uranus. And that will not be until the end of September, which is quite a challenging moment, actually. So anything that's kind of reflected upon between now and the end of September is really kind of going to burst out at the end of that time. So there's some really interesting kind of energies right there. Other aspects to this Mercury retrograde are that Mercury really is, I'm just going to get my line back, in a square to Vesta, but like Uranus, the square is not exact yet, and Vesta is not going retrograde. But I do think that, you know, it's still really in an orb of a square, and Vesta is in Mercury's other home sign, Gemini. And so that's more change coming. And Vesta is often to do with both our inner flame and the hearth of the state. So this station this week is pretty powerful. And also on the Mercury station, the moon is opposing Uranus and in aspect to Mercury, and the moon is in Scorpio. Both Virgo and Scorpio actually have a very kind of investigative, detective kind of feel to them. And I think, you know, there's going to be a lot of secrets unearthed during this retrograde. They may not come to light until afterwards, but I think some will. But I think this is saying there's really much more kind of dirt and skeletons and things to be unearthed and to be reflected on during this retrograde. All right, so I think that's enough for the station. I'm just going to talk about some of the major aspects. Now, I started with the conjunction to Pallas, and of course, that's going to be exact on August the 26th. That's just 3 days after the station retrograde, and the time around the stations are the most kind of potent, really, and the middle as well. We'll look at that. So, you know, that's kind of going to be really kind of piercing in the dark. I also think of Pallas Athena as a bit like going down into Wonderland, like Alice in Wonderland did. It's kind of looking at things kind of a bit differently. Everything's a bit distorted, and you've got to kind of make sense of it. And so, you know, that really, again, sets the scene as well. Then, as I said, on the 28th, Uranus will station retrograde, so we've got more change coming with that. But let's go into one of the first major aspects. So that's going to be Mercury opposing Centaur Nessus, and that's on September the 2nd. That's apart from the start with the aspects, the opposition from Mercury to Centaur Nessus over here in Pisces is the first major aspect on September the 2nd. Nessus reveals abuses of power. And you can see with Mercury in review and reflection and revisiting mode in the sign of Virgo, in analysis and kind of detective mode and digging deep, I think more abuses of power are going to be revealed. And with Mercury being news, I think some could come out very soon as well. So that's a really big moment. Now, the very next day, Mercury actually reaches what's called perigee, which is the closest to the Earth. And that means that the planets actually have more impact when they are retrograde because they are close to Earth. So when Mercury gets close to the Earth, Mercury is still opposing Nessus. So more revealing of abuses of power. And another term for Nessus from Melanie Reinhardt, who has studied the centaurs greatly and written about them, is the buck stops here. It's kind of like we've had enough of these abuses of power, of the bullies, of the people who think they are above, you know, the law and above being of service. So really expect some things to be really uncovered during this period. As I said, the actual results of that might not happen till later, but do expect that. Now, on the September the 3rd as well, Venus actually stations direct. So from August the 23rd to September the 3rd, we actually have the two most personal planets other than the luminaries, the sun and the moon, both retrograde. And so, you know, there's a lot of shifting and changing then. As Venus stations retrograde, Mercury is approaching the middle of that retrograde. And so more change, another change of direction. And Venus representing our values, our relationships, and also the manifest world, like money and things like that. I think there's going to be some big shifts around then as well. And then the very next day after, Mercury will trine, and I'm going to get this one exact for you. Mercury will move back to 15 degrees of Virgo and make a trine to Jupiter. And Mercury is already trined Jupiter once. We can actually quickly show you when that was. That was on August the 9th. And now we have September the 4th, and they will trine again towards the end of September, when I think September, the end of September is going to be a bit of a an interesting time, shall we say. But Jupiter is at the world point on this aspect, and Jupiter is in one of Venus's home signs, Taurus, and it's the most earthly sign, and Venus is still at her station direct point. There could be some big shifts in direction in matters, material matters at that point, okay, or some big information come out about perhaps material or financial corruption as well, with that opposition to Nessus still really in play. And then after that, well, just hours after that, in fact, so let me show you. On September the 4th, we've got Mercury trine Jupiter. Mercury is well into the retrograde now, well past the station point, but is close to the middle of the retrograde. Jupiter stations retrograde as well. So Uranus stationed retrograde right after Mercury, then Venus stationed direct, and now Jupiter stations retrograde. We have a lot of change coming in this retrograde. Big changes, big shifts, big reviewing, reflection, redoing, all that kind of stuff. You know, how it's showing up for some, like, I want to talk more about you personally, but Virgo for me is in one area of my chart, and it's been coming up about my deepest kind of value system around how I work and how I set up my work and things like that. So I don't want to go into too much detail. That's my own path. But you can think back to 2016, what shifted for you then. But every retrograde is different. Also, Jupiter is stationing retrograde at a world point. So that's another big shift and change. And the moon was in Scorpio when Mercury stationed retrograde, and now is with Jupiter. There could be a lot come up around climate change and our values around the earth and how we treat the earth as well. I think there's going to be a lot come up about that. All right, so now let's move to the middle of the retrograde, which is the cazimi. So we have a cazimi on September the 6th at 7:09 a.m. Traditionally, astrology says that when the Sun and Mercury were in 17 minutes, solar arc minutes of each other, that was the cazimi. A lot of modern astrologers give it a bit longer, but let's just look at the exact conjunction. Here we have a conjunction at 13 degrees Virgo, which actually really kind of lights me up, because 13 is the number of the goddess, the magic number, the witch number, and it adds to the journey of the Venus retrograde that I've been working with, in that feeling that the divine feminine in all of us is rising. And that basically means that we are becoming more attracted to yin ways of working, of, you know, more collaborative, more interconnected, more working with things. Not to say that the divine feminine is all wonderful all the time, but I have, you know, noticed for a while in the story of the collective planets as they progress and evolve, that we are being pulled more towards this divine feminine way of working in the world, for want of a better term. You know, we're getting a lot of messages about how we've been treating the earth, which is very divine feminine, and how we must treat the earth in more loving ways. Now, Mercury, when on the cazimi, is in a semi-sextile to Venus, who's just starting to move forward from her station direct on September the 3rd. And semi-sextile's interesting. They're kind of giving each other a bit of side eye, saying, what have I got to learn from you? And this cazimi is often a sweet spot in the middle of the retrograde, where you get some real kind of amazing insights. So, you know, pay attention to what comes your way on the cazimi. All right. Okay, so let's move forward. Now, after the cazimi, you know, I haven't looked at all the lunar aspects. That's it. Mercury makes no more major aspects in the second half of the retrograde. It feels like the second half of the retrograde is really about reintegrating all the stuff that's come up from quite a powerful start, and all these changes that are coming, and how we are going to transition into these changes as Mercury starts to move forward. So we're going to take you right to the Mercury station direct point on September the 15th and have a look at that chart. So Mercury is over here at exactly 8 degrees of Virgo. All right. And really not making any major aspects as Mercury stations direct. It's quite interesting having this almost aspectless period when Mercury is in the second half of the retrograde. That's going to be a real time of, I think it's going to be quite confusing, actually, because it's almost like Mercury is in a bit of a void state. It's like had all these big changes at the start, and now we're kind of floating around going, what do I do with this? But anyway, once Mercury stations direct, I love that Mercury's stationing direct at 8 degrees. 8 is a number of stability. It's a number of infinity. It's a number of strength. So, you know, I think we will be really strengthened and steeling ourselves to be the change that we want to be in that world. Now, I'm not going to look at the aspects through the shadow yet, because I just want to look a little bit more at this chart. And as Mercury stations direct, I'm going to be doing a whole video on this. Eris and the nodes are really close. They're at the same degree. They don't actually meet until later, because the nodes are, well, Eris moves very slowly because she has a 500 and something year orbit, and the nodes are going to hit a standstill because we'll be heading into eclipse season. But this Eris is the shitster, the shaker-upper, the table shaker. She also reveals injustice and outside and stands for outsiders and people that have been left out. So, you know, that's a quite powerful aspect that's building. And Mars is in Leo now and is approaching the South Node. So we're going to head into a time that I'm going to do a whole nother video about, which is quite challenging. But as Mercury stations direct, we will really be starting to feel this discord. And just to give you some idea of where this is all going to, October the 14th will be the first eclipse, and October the 28th will be that's a new moon solar eclipse. October the 28th is a full moon eclipse as well. So we have all that as well. So a just quick look at the aspects as Mercury moves back forward and revisits the degrees he's retrograded over, or they've retrograded over. So on September the 25th, towards the end of that period, you can see that Mercury is now at 14 degrees, back to around where the Cazimi was. And that's when there's another exact trine, the last exact trine this cycle to Jupiter. So big news emerging probably. Then on the 26th, sorry, not the 16th, Mercury, the next day, Mercury is going to oppose Nessus again. And Mercury is now at 16 degrees. So it's heading back towards ending the whole retrograde period. So I think, you know, anything that's been uncovered during the Mercury retrograde is going to start coming out. And then the biggest kind of aspect is the trine to Uranus, right at the end of the month. And let's look at this moment. And again, I'll be doing a whole another video coming up. But Mercury by this point is now at 22 degrees, which he's left the building. He's past the degree he's stationed retrograde at. Now the exact trine to Uranus comes with, you know, this could bring shocks. Uranus is expect the unexpected. Yeah, even though it's a trine, which is thought to be a supportive aspect, trines can bring surprises too, just as squares can push for good change as well. So, you know, don't get too wrapped up with good or bad. That's going to be a big day news-wise. But as Mercury leaves the shadow of the retrograde and trines Uranus, we also have Mars now. Mars in Libra at the same degree. So remember, semi-sextiles, side-eye, looking at each other. Whoa. Mars is also in sextile to a Venus-Juno conjunction, which is really about our relationships and so on. Venus is still in the shadow of her retrograde, but she is almost out of it as well. So we've got a lot around 22, 23, 24 degrees on this moment. The moon will also be on the North Node, and the North Node and Eris will only be a degree apart as Mercury emerges from the shadow. This looks shocking. This looks like there's going to be some big shocks, shifts, surprises, unexpected developments. Some of it can be innovative. Some of it could be, you know, surprising new discoveries. New scientific discoveries could be uncovered as well. There may be a little confusion around it as this happens, though, because Mercury is about to oppose Neptune in Pisces as well. But also that can be clearing the clouds and things becoming clear. So that's a really big moment as Mercury makes that trine exactly to Uranus on September the 30th. The few days around that time are going to be really interesting as well. Wow, what a time. Now I'm just going to stop the share and I'm pausing the recording because I do want to share one chart. Okay. All right, we're going to look at former President Trump's chart very quickly. I've not got, I don't want to say a lot about it, although there is an awful lot I could say about it. But Mercury stations retrograde in his first house and is going to spend that whole time in his first house, which is who he is, who he shows himself to be in the world. Now, you know, we have Mercury retrograde in Virgo every 6 years or so, 6-7 years. But this station retrograde is in a T-square to Donald Trump's Moon-Sun opposition and his lunar nodes. Donald Trump was born on an eclipse, and he is a Gemini, which is Mercury's sign. So, and he was not born with a Mercury retrograde. So this is likely to bring some major changes in this man's life. And we're seeing that already as we approach it. Add to that, this trine to Uranus is happening almost at the top of his chart, his most public visibility, and Uranus is then going to retrograde back into the 9th house, which does have a big association with courts, judges, and so on, and the law. Okay, so I think there's some big changes coming for him. I'm not going to go through every aspect, but I do want to point out that Venus has been retrograding in his 12th house of loss, and his 12th house of surrender and letting go, and also is often known as the house of imprisonment. I don't usually kind of look at that, but Venus is coming up station close to his Pluto, which is major as well, and opposing his Ceres, which is how he nourishes and nurtures and feeds. And anyway, no comment on how he does that. I'm going to go straight to the retrograde direct and just show you that Mercury will station direct on September the 5th in a sextile to his natal Mercury. And so, you know, there could be some big news and big changes coming then as well for him. So that's big. And one last aspect, when Mercury trines Uranus, it's back at 22 degrees. Uranus is at 22 degrees and Mercury is exactly squaring his sun by just, less than 20 astrological minutes. And well, there's a lot more going on there, but I just wanted to alert you to it. I'm not going to give any forecasts. I just want you to be aware that this is impacting the former president in a big way. So I hope you enjoyed that. Please subscribe, leave me a thumbs up, leave me a comment, and I hope you like the background. Much love to you all.